think it's important to understand the cultural context too.
Yes, that adds another layer.
The midday sun blazed over the quiet countryside, its heat pressing down on the small farmhouse where Hang sat, hunched over a worn wooden table. His hands, calloused from years of labor, trembled slightly as he traced invisible circles on the tabletop. Across from him, his mother's brow furrowed deeply, her voice a soft murmur of worry. The doctor's words from the city echoed between them. Nhat could not conceive naturally. Artificial insemination was their only chance, and the cost was staggering. Hang clenched his fists, the rough wood biting into his palms. He could almost hear the unspoken ache in his mother's voice, her longing for grandchildren, her fear of what this meant for their family. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass, whispering secrets that only deepened the silence between them. Suddenly, the screen door creaked open, and Nhat's mother stepped inside, her face lined with anger and accusation. She did not greet them. Instead, she pointed a trembling finger at Hang's mother. "This is your fault," she spat, her voice sharp. "You once forced Nhat to take that medicine, and now she may never give birth." Hang's mother's eyes widened, then narrowed in wounded disbelief. "That was years ago," she protested, her voice cracking. "I thought it would help, not harm. Don't you dare blame me for all of this." The room seemed to shrink as the two women's words collided like stones, their accusations slicing through the air. The argument spiraled, the bitterness of old grievances spilling over. Hang rose from his chair, his chest tight. "Enough!" he barked, though his own voice trembled. "This isn't helping Nhat. This isn't helping anyone." But the echoes of their anger clung to the room like smoke, impossible to dispel. When the shouting subsided, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Hang stepped outside, the sun now low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. He thought of Nhat, her quiet tears on the bus ride home, the way she had forced a smile to reassure him, though he could see the fear in her eyes. As night fell, the family gathered again, but dinner was little more than a formality. Hang's appetite had vanished. He excused himself early and sat on the porch, staring at the dark outline of the hills. In the distance, a lone dog barked, the sound hollow against the vast, empty fields. The next morning, Hang rose before dawn. He had already made a decision. He would borrow whatever money he could, friends, relatives, even strangers if necessary. Artificial insemination was expensive, but losing the dream of a child was a cost he could not bear. He kissed Nhat's forehead lightly as she slept, promising silently that he would find a way. By midday, Hang was on his motorbike, its engine groaning as he navigated the winding country roads. He stopped at an old friend's house, a man he had shared countless childhood memories with. But the friend only shook his head apologetically. He had invested everything in a new herd of pigs. There was nothing left to lend. Rejection weighed heavily on Hang's shoulders as he rode away. The fields blurred past him, their golden hues now mocking reminders of prosperity that wasn't his. Each door he knocked on brought the same answer: regret, sympathy, but no money. Back at home, Nhat sat with her mother-in-law, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "Don't worry," the older woman murmured, her tone gentler now. "Hang will find a way." But her eyes, when they met Nhat's, betrayed her fear. The future seemed like a distant shore they might never reach. Hang returned at dusk, exhausted and empty-handed. His clothes smelled of dust and despair. He didn't speak as he stepped inside, but the slump of his shoulders told Nhat everything. She reached for his hand, her own trembling, and whispered, "We'll figure it out, somehow." The two mothers sat in uneasy silence, their earlier anger dulled by the stark reality of their children's pain. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, not as enemies, but as women who both loved the same struggling family. The weight of their shared regret hung between them. As darkness enveloped the small farmhouse, Hang lay awake beside Nhat, staring at the cracked ceiling. He imagined their future child's laughter echoing through these walls. The thought brought a flicker of hope amid the despair. Though the road ahead seemed impossible, he tightened his grip on Nhat's hand. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that love, and the fierce will to protect it, could forge a path even through the darkest of nights. The morning light spilled softly across the fields, painting the farmhouse in gold. Hang woke with a heaviness in his chest, the memory of yesterday's failures gnawing at him. Beside him, Nhat still slept, her face pale even in the warm light. He brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead and whispered silently to himself, "I can't let her down." In the kitchen, his mother stood quietly by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. She replayed every harsh word from yesterday's argument with Nhat's mother, regret burning in her chest. She had spoken from anger, but deep inside she blamed herself too. The fragile peace shattered when Nhat's mother arrived again, her expression rigid, her voice sharp. "Have you found a way to pay yet?" she demanded. Hang's mother stiffened, and the tension between them reignited. "Do you think I can summon a fortune overnight?" she snapped back. Their words clashed like thunder, each accusation deepening the wounds that had yet to heal. Hang stepped between them, his face drawn. "Stop," he said firmly, though his voice wavered. "This isn't about blame anymore. It's about saving what's left of our family." But the silence that followed felt brittle, as if a single wrong word could shatter it again. Later that day, Hang rode into town, his motorbike rattling over cracked roads. He stopped at the local bank, clutching a folder of documents with trembling hands. Inside, the bank officer glanced through the papers and shook his head. "Your mother's unpaid debts make this impossible," he said bluntly. Hang's shoulders sagged under the weight of disappointment. Leaving the bank, Hang paused outside beneath a frayed awning. The noise of the town, vendors shouting, children laughing, felt distant and unreal. He thought of selling their house and land, but he knew the truth. No one would buy a property so remote, so barren. Even desperation had limits. Meanwhile, back at the farmhouse, Nhat sat on the porch, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress. She stared out at the fields, the weight of her condition pressing down on her like an invisible burden. She thought of the life she had imagined, a family, children playing in the yard, and felt it slipping away like smoke through her fingers. Hang returned home at dusk, his clothes dust-streaked, his eyes hollow. He said nothing as he set his helmet on the table. Nhat approached him, her heart breaking at the sight. "You tried," she whispered, her voice trembling. "That's all that matters." But Hang shook his head, his jaw tight. "Trying isn't enough," he muttered. "We need answers." His mother, sitting silently in the corner, finally spoke. "I'll go with you tomorrow," she said softly. "We'll ask everyone we know, even the ones I swore I'd never ask again." Her voice cracked under the weight of her own shame. Hang met her gaze, and for the first time in days, something like understanding passed between them. The following morning, the three of them sat together, planning their next moves over a simple breakfast of rice and tea. The atmosphere was heavy but united, the arguments of the past temporarily buried beneath a shared resolve. Nhat watched them quietly, her chest tightening with gratitude and guilt. Later, Hang's motorbike carried him to distant relatives, old friends, anyone who might still hold enough goodwill to help. But at each door, the answer was the same: sympathetic eyes, regretful shakes of the head. The weight of rejection grew unbearable, but he forced himself to keep knocking. That evening, Nhat's mother returned once more, this time quieter. She handed Hang's mother a small bag of rice. "I said cruel things," she admitted, her voice low, "but I only said them because I'm scared for my daughter." Hang's mother accepted the offering, her own eyes wet. "We're both scared," she replied softly. As the sun dipped below the hills, Hang and Nhat sat together on the porch, the sky streaked with crimson and gold. The silence between them was gentle this time, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Hang reached for her hand, squeezing it firmly. "We're not giving up," he said. "Even if we have nothing, we still have hope." Nhat leaned her head on his shoulder, tears slipping down her cheeks unnoticed. The road ahead was uncertain, the cost enormous. But in that moment, the world felt a little less heavy. Together, under the gathering stars, they clung to the fragile belief that love and the will to fight for it could guide them through the darkest of times. The third day dawned cold and gray, a thin mist coiling through the valley as Hang stepped out of the farmhouse. His breath came in slow clouds, his mind churning with worry. The weight of unpaid debts, broken pride, and fragile hope pressed heavily on his shoulders. He glanced back at the house where Nhat was still asleep, her fragile figure curled beneath a quilt that couldn't keep out the chill of despair. Inside, Hang's mother boiled a small pot of tea, her hands steady, but her eyes distant. She thought of the past, the choices she'd made, the warnings she hadn't heeded, and the way her anger had blinded her. When Nhat's mother arrived mid-morning, there was no venom in her greeting this time. The two women exchanged weary nods, the tension between them softened by exhaustion. They sat at the table together, silent at first, until Nhat's mother spoke. "I shouldn't have blamed you for everything," she admitted, her voice low, "but I can't stop thinking. If only—" Her words trailed off, but Hang's mother finished the thought quietly. "If only we had chosen kindness sooner." The admission hung between them, fragile but real. Hang returned late that afternoon, his motorbike sputtering as he parked. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. "No one has money to lend," he said flatly. "Even those who want to help. They can't." The silence that followed was like a weight settling over the room. Nhat's soft footsteps approached. She reached for his hand and squeezed. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hang, maybe we don't need to do this now, maybe—" But he shook his head fiercely. "No, we've waited long enough. I promised you a family, and I won't break that promise." His eyes burned with determination, even as fear gnawed at his resolve. As evening approached, Hang's mother rummaged through an old wooden chest in the corner of the room. Inside, wrapped in a faded scarf, was a small gold ring, her wedding band. She held it in her palm, her fingers trembling. Approaching Hang, she pressed it into his hand. "It's not much," she said softly, "but pawn it if you must. It's time I gave instead of taking." Hang stared at the ring, his throat tightening. Later, Nhat's mother left quietly, but not before placing a small envelope on the table. It contained only a few 100,000 jong, barely a fraction of what was needed, but it was an olive branch. Hang's mother noticed the gesture and felt her own bitterness melt a little more. Sometimes, even a small offering could bridge a canyon of resentment. That night, Hang and Nhat sat outside beneath a wide, star-studded sky. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and wet grass. Nhat leaned against him, her eyes searching the constellations for answers. "Do you ever regret loving me?" she asked suddenly, her voice breaking. Hang turned to her, shocked. "Never," he said fiercely. "Even if the world falls apart, even if we lose everything else, loving you is the only thing I'll never regret." Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she rested her head on his shoulder. For a long time, they stayed that way. The only sound, the distant croak of frogs and the whisper of wind through the grass. Their future was uncertain, but in that fragile moment, they found strength in the simple act of holding on. The next morning, Hang visited a distant cousin he had not spoken to in years. He swallowed his pride and explained his situation. The cousin listened, his expression somber, and finally offered to connect Hang with a friend who might help. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a thread, a fragile, precious thread of hope. Meanwhile, back at the farmhouse, The two mothers worked side by side in the yard, clearing debris and feeding the chickens. Their movements were stiff at first, but as the morning wore on, they began to speak about the weather, about the crops, about Nee's laughter. Slowly, the bitterness between them loosened, replaced by a quiet understanding that family, even fractured, was worth saving. Hang returned that evening with news. A small loan might be possible, but only if he could offer collateral. The house and land were still off the table. His mother refused to risk losing the only home they had, but she surprised him by saying, "Maybe we can find another way. I'll go with you tomorrow. We'll ask again." Her words, simple but resolute, filled the room with a fragile warmth. That night, as the family shared a modest dinner of rice and vegetables, laughter returned, tentative at first, then genuine. Hang cracked a small joke about the stubborn old rooster in the yard, and even Sinnat's mother chuckled. For a moment, the future didn't seem so impossible. Before bed, Hang stood outside again, staring at the moon. His heart was still heavy with uncertainty, but he felt a shift inside him, a sense that they were no longer facing the storm alone. The road ahead would be long, the cost steep, but love and determination had forged something unbreakable between them. As the farmhouse settled into quiet, Hang whispered a silent promise to the night sky. He would find the money, he would give Sinnat the chance at motherhood she deserved, and he would hold his family together no matter how fierce the world became. Beneath the stars, surrounded by the soft hum of crickets and the sleeping earth, hope stirred, a fragile flame refusing to be extinguished.